So, well, nobody remembers. Yeah, great. So I will remind you briefly that the board is the special body that has been invented for corporate governance to somehow coincide the interests of shareholders and managers of the company, and to resolve actually the agency problem that arises between the managers and the shareholders, and that managers of the company report to the board of directors, and the board makes its recommendations to shareholders and also listens to shareholders. And the board is also responsible somehow for implementation of the company's strategy. So the main responsibility, the direct responsibility, is on the managers of the company, but the board should consist of people who are having this strategic vision and who can somehow make the estimations whether managers have this vision and whether they drive the company in a proper direction. So what did we know about the board? And we also know about the composition of the board in different systems of in different models of corporate governance. So the role of the board of directors is ultimately responsible for the company's business affairs and governance, as stated in its governing documents, including the articles of incorporation, the bylaws, and the shareholder agreements. Yes, so the responsibility of the board is actually defined by these documents. So the articles of the incorporation, the charters, the bylaws, and shareholder agreements. And certainly, whether the board is successful or not, it affects greatly the company's performance and the capitalization of the company. And the success of the board depends on the composition, structure, resources, diligence, and the authority of the entire board, as well as their working relationships with other participants of corporate governance. So the other participants are management of the company, certainly also the external auditors, the internal auditors, also legal counsel, professional advisors, regulators, standard setting bodies, and certainly shareholders, investors of the company. And it is very important to have the proper composition of the board, and the structure of the board, the resources that the board has, and the diligence, yeah? And also the power, the authority of the whole board. So, if you remember, in corporate governance, there are two main systems. So one is the one-tier system that is mostly relevant for the Anglo-American system of corporate governance, Anglo-American model of corporate governance. And in the one-tier system, we have the board of directors that consists of insiders and outsiders. So insiders are the company's management, yeah, or they are the representatives of the company's managers. As for outsiders, they are mostly independent directors or non-executive directors. With the two-tier system, we have the supervisory board. For the one-tier system, so shareholders, they actually vote for the board of directors. So here, in the two-tier system, which is mostly relevant for the German model of corporate governance, we see actually two boards. Yes, so one board is the supervisory board that has the functions and actually fulfills the functions of the board of directors. And this board is what shareholders vote for. And the supervisory board also attains the management board. So the management board consists of the company's management. So the management board reports to the supervisory board, and the supervisory boards, in its turn, they report to shareholders. So these are two main systems. You looked already at some cases in the German model, in the continental Europe, and you know that now, even within this model, we can observe some movements towards the one-tier board system. Yeah, but still we have this two-tier system. And in Germany, in two-tier system, we have these overlapping elements. Yes, so actually, it's a little bit more complicated because alongside with their management of the company, they also have the representatives of employees. So employees and labor unions, they delegate their representatives to the supervisory board, to the board of directors. And certainly there is a close interaction between the supervisory board and their managerial board, the management board of the company. So they do not work separately. Yes, they interact with each other. As for the Anglo-American system, so we see here also some overlapping elements. There is more outsiders in the board and more independent directors. Yeah, so we see here also insiders within the board. And in the Anglo-American system, there is the permission for the chief executive officer to be at the same time the chairman of the board. But the growing trend, which is mostly supported by activist investors, so they're quite active and they make a lot of personal applications to the board, to the shareholders of the company. So driven by activist investors, we see the trend for last, I think, 15 years, that the chief executive officer and the chairman of the board, they are separated, and usually this is not the same person. So we can see again here the managers who are insiders mostly and the outsiders. And as I have said, the number of outsiders and the proportion of outsiders in the board of directors is growing. So we cannot say that there are the boards that consist totally of outsiders. There always will be the representatives of companies' managers. So we can think that it is not like the one tier, but again, we can see the management board, the representatives of management as a special sector of the board of directors and the outsiders. So probably it's formally a one-tier system. The board is only one, but as they represent different stakeholders, we can somehow think about this board as a 1.5 tier, but formally it's one tier, certainly. So in Russia, we do not have the strict regulation on the composition and the structure of the board. There are some regulatory frameworks that define some elements of the board, but there is no special regulation concerning one-tier board and two-tier board systems. So the Russian companies, they can choose between two. So they can choose between one-tier board that includes executive and non-executive directors, and very often chairman is the same person as the chief executive officer in this case. But the company itself, by its bylaws, can somehow forbid this, cannot permit this. So it depends on the company's laws, internal laws. And also Russian companies, they can choose the two-tier board system. Many companies, they use like a hybrid system within which about 25, so maximum 25% of supervisory board can be comprised of executive board members. And so when they choose, there is a trade-off, as always, the trade-off between the control, so with two-tier, and the efficiency. With two-tier, we have more control over managers because we have the supervisory board that actually monitors the managers, and the efficiency. So certainly with our system, it's easier to make direct decision. It takes less time and less internal resources of the company. So the company should choose between these. And if you remember two cases from the Russian companies, I have shown you in one of our previous lectures. So these two cases were Magnit and Rosneft. So with Magnit, we had the one-tier system, yes, so there was only board of director, and Sergei Galitsky, who was once the founder of the company and the chief executive officer of the company, he also performed the functions of the chairman of the board, which was quite efficient while the company was growing. But it became the main obstacle in corporate governance when the company started to face difficulties. And this was the reason why, so one of the reasons why shareholders were not happy with the board decision actually on dividends payments. And that's why Sergei Galitsky had to sell his stake in the company and step out of the business. Yeah. And the second example I had given you in that lecture was about Rosneft. So Rosneft is a typical two-tier board because they have their supervisory board, the board of directors, and the management board. And in this case, we remember that Igor Sechin, who is the chief executive officer of Rosneft, he is the vice chairman of the board, so not the chairman of the board. And actually, Rosneft has 25% of executives in a supervisory board. Yes, so it's the second model, yes, the so-called hybrid model. So in Russia, we have actually also overlapping elements. So we have the shareholders, we have the board that consists of outsiders and insiders, and actually this can be either one board or two boards, the supervisory board and the executive board. So within the supervisory board, maximum 20% of executives are permitted. Yeah, and actually the supervisory board is mandatory for open, actually public joint stock companies with more than 50 voting shareholders. So if you have less than 50 voting shareholders, for example, you are the company that has 100%, so one shareholder that has 100% of shares, or two shareholders, so you can then choose between two models. If you have more than 50 voting shareholders, so you can have you should have the supervisory board and the executive board. And 25% of executives are within their supervisory board, so which is the overlapping actually. And well, the chief executive officer he can be the chairman, but also the company's law can prohibit him from being the chairman, so it is depending on the company law. Yeah. So, well, we have these compositions of the board, and then we should look at the board configuration. So who can be the members of the board? So here we can see different representations, and actually these representations, they can arise the problems of governance. They also can raise some questions concerning the voting procedure of the voting principles and so on. So actually these are the main questions that we can ask ourselves when we discuss the configuration of the board. So who could be the members of the board? First, the board should represent the shareholders, which is naturally, so shareholders vote for the members of the board, so it's very naturally if they have the members of the board that represent their main interests. Yeah, but the question is which shareholders can represent in the board. Yes, so it's quite natural that there are the representatives of the majority shareholder. Yeah, because of the voting, so shareholders vote for the members of the board. What about minorities? Should minorities be presented in the board? From one point of view, yes, because otherwise nobody will care about the interests of minorities. So if minorities have representation in the board, so they can be sure that their interests would be protected in all corporate governance issues. And if you remember this battle between Carl Icahn and eBay, that happened in 2014, 2015. So one of the questions that actually was to be decided, and Carl Icahn as the activist investor was insisting on, was about representing his interests. So he was not the majority shareholder of eBay. Actually, he had about 4.5% of shares, which is quite large amount for the American company, but still he was not the majority shareholders. But one of the main issues that he insisted on was the representation of his company in the board. Finally, he got 2 directors who represented his main interests. Yeah. So this is a question, and if we think about the minority representation, so how we can organize the voting process? Yeah, so there are some voting principles, and actually the more shares you have, the more is your power over managers. So the better should be your representation in the board. So how we should protect minorities? So probably there could be some quotas for directors who protect minorities, but this is a question. Also, what about the other stakeholders? So in different models, so other stakeholders are also presented. So if you remember the Japanese model, so in Japanese model, we have the presenters, the representation of sorry, can I make a short break? I'm very sorry, but I should answer the call. Yeah, sorry. Sorry for the break in the lecture. I'm really sorry. Not very good day, Monday. Yes, so too much issues to be solved. Okay, so as for the other stakeholders, so we have the Japanese stakeholders. In Japanese model, we have you remember the bank representatives. We also have the representatives of main suppliers. We have sometimes the representatives of customers and of the government in the board. That's why the board is quite large. And it sometimes leads Japanese companies to problems, to different problems. And usually the main problem of Japanese companies is low cost efficiency. For example, if we look at the automakers like Nissan, so before Nissan has aligned with Renault in 2000, previously the company had 67% of debt in its asset structure and very low credibility. So actually bonds were perceived as junk bonds at the market. and the company did not have profit, did not enjoy profits for several years before, because their main suppliers were in their were at the same time the shareholders of the company, and also were representatives of the board. So any attempts of Nissan's management to start the cost reduction problems actually failed, because the board just rejected these attempts. Yeah, so this is a problem. And well, also about the employees' representativeness. So the employees are represented in the board in the German model. It also sometimes leads to some problems. For example, the company where we have the representatives of employees, it is also very problematic in the terms of cost efficiency, because certainly it cannot undertake any attempts to reduce the working force, to reduce the salaries, and mostly they increase salaries, which is very good from the point of view of employees, but from the company's efficiency viewpoint, it is not very good all the time. So it is also always. Не брала. Кто брал? Я работаю. The trade-off. The trade-off. And also as for the executives in the supervisory board. So the executives should be presented anyway. As for the but certainly there should be some monitor over executives. So what proportion of executives should be in the supervisory board? Again, the question about chief executive officer and chairman. So whether the chief executive officer should be the chairman. It makes easier all the problems of our company. So all the decision of problems in our company. But at the same time, it actually protects the chief executive officer from the control from shareholders and from the control of other members of the board. So what should be the number of independent directors? How many independent directors is satisfactory? This is also a question, yeah, because, well, nobody tells us about this. So should independent directors present the majority in the board or minority in the board? Whether these directors are really independent. So the question is independent from who? From managers, which is naturally, but also from blockholders, from stakeholders. This is Витя, спроси, может быть, он брал. Он не брал, я сказал. Я бабушка. Мою, Саша, ну так нельзя, я пытаюсь работать. Работать, все хорошо. Я тоже пытаюсь работать. Да, только ты мне мешаешь лекцию читать, я тебе не мешаю. Да, что беру что-нибудь, да, не читаю. Как ты почитаешь? Okay, and as for the diversity, so certainly the questions of diversity now are very, very important, and this is discussed in many papers. So diversity means that there should be different representatives of different groups, different communities. So very often companies, well, especially old companies who are mature and who have already their system of corporate governance that has been formatted by years previously. So they discuss that this, the boards of these companies, they look like pale, male, and stale, which is quite a joke, but not actually the joke. This is the part of truth. So actually the board should not be a pale, male, and stale, and we have discussed this also on the example of Victoria's Secret. Yeah, so the company who filed for bankruptcy this year, and certainly it filed for bankruptcy due to different reasons. The main reason was actually their overcoming of e-commerce in the United States and also in Great Britain over the traditional retail. And this overcoming comes actually to different sectors of the market, including the fashionable lingerie, which is the main specialization for Victoria's Secret. So the criticism to the major shareholders and the managers of the company was actually aimed at their lack of strategic vision. So this change in their interests of the target audience that has not been predicted. So the target audience becomes younger, and for the younger people it is more natural not to look at the fashion but to think in other modes, so ecologically based thinking, which sometimes goes not very aligning with the traditional focus of Victoria's Secret. So if the members of the board probably were not just pale, male and stale, which is the case of Victoria's Secret, despite this company is focused mostly, actually totally on ladies, on female audience, there was no female representatives in the board before 2017. So if the board could be more diverse, they probably could predict all these situations that has taken place later. So this is one of the reasons. So diversity should take place. The main question actually concerning the board configuration is who and how makes the board. And you can understand that this is a question of voting. So the main principle how the board is elected is the cumulative voting. So how the cumulative voting works? The candidates for the supervisory board, if we discuss the supervisory board, are voted on collectively, so as a group. Each shareholder has a maximum number of votes equal to the number of directors that must be elected. So this number of directors is given according to the charter or a decision of annual general meeting, shareholders meeting. And for example, the total number of directors could be re-elected yearly, which is not the case, but usually the tenure for the board, so before election or between several elections, can be 2 or 3 years. And that means that, for example, this year 1/3 of directors should be re-elected. Yeah? So the number of directors that must be elected multiplies by the number of voting shares held. So each shareholder has a maximum number of votes. For example, if you have 200 shares, yeah, and you should re-elect 3 directors, so you have 600 votes, yeah. And these 600 votes can be allocated in different ways. So you can, for example, give all your votes to one candidate, or you can divide them among several candidates that are proposed as they please. Yeah. So, and when we have all votes and all candidates, so we just sum up, accumulate the number of votes, and the top X 2 or 3 candidates, depending on the company's charter, with the most votes are considered to be elected, whereby X, so the number equals to the number of supervisory board members to be elected as specified by the charter or the decision of the annual general meeting. Yeah. As for the independence, so this is how the voting goes. So as for the independent directors, so there are several focuses that explain the concept of independence. So the first focus is the owner-manager problem. So directors should be independent from managers of the company. So in this case, certainly, if the directors should be independent from managers, so usually the chairman of the board should be an independent director, yeah? And certainly the chief executive officer and the chairman of the board should not be the one person, so this should be different persons. Also, independent directors should not have any executive positions in the company. So independent from managers means that directors do not have executive positions. Chief executive officer can be the member of the board, but he or she should not be in nomination committee. So he should not or she should not propose new members of the board. And certainly there should not be any family relations or other close relations to the managers of the company. And also that means that chief executive officer should not have any power in the decision about what consultants, what lawyers, what auditors to employ by the company. Yeah, so this somehow marks the independence of directors from managers of the company. So in this case,
I'm sorry. Can I ask a question very fast regarding the previous slide?
Alina, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
I was wondering because I mean the Japanese model, it often includes when the situation when the CEO is also the director of the board, or there are many family relations within the board. And so does it mean that they somehow violate this rule, or is it just like as like a feature of this type of
this is a feature of this type of model, as we have discussed. So Japanese model is mostly focused on keiretsu. Yes, and with keiretsu, we always have these representatives of different stakeholders within the board. So the board is huge, yeah, but independent directors, they have very small amount of independent directors, so or they do not have independent directors at all. So it depends on how the company is positioning itself. So if the company wants, so actually Japanese companies, they often do not need in listing in other stock exchanges, for example, because the Tokyo Stock Exchange is huge, and also we have some other stock exchanges in Japan. So if the company is oriented only on the internal market, and as we remember, so Japanese companies, they actually do not need a lot of equity funding. Yes, so they mostly are funded by banks. Yes, so the representation on the stock exchange has mostly like the image making functions. Yeah, so if Japanese company, for example, is listed only on Tokyo Stock Exchange, so actually they have, I don't know, the minimum amount of independent directors according to the law. I do not remember now, but it can be 1 or 2, not more. If the Japanese company has stocks listed at the other stock exchanges, for example, at New York Stock Exchange or at NASDAQ, and it happens more and more often because many Japanese companies are acquiring American ones and vice versa. So in this case, they increase the number of independent directors. But these independent directors are sometimes just formal, so they do not have some relationships, some close relationships with the manager of the companies. But at the same time, they still present the minority in the board. Yes, so for Japan, their huge amount of independent directors is something that is not very relevant. Yeah, and so this is the question.
And so the independent directors, do they are they more reluctant to join the Japanese type of corporate governance because of the way it's made?
It depends again, because you see, when Japanese company somehow they invite independent directors, so it's a question of money also. Yes, so the remuneration is quite high, and this is one of the reasons why Japanese companies have independent directors, mostly foreigners, not only Japanese people. Yeah. But certainly, yes. So if you as an independent director somehow agrees that you will be the independent director in Japanese company, you also think about some reasons to do this, and you understand that you would not have power at all, or your power will be very small if you compare with the power of other directors. So it's mostly the question of remuneration, of representation, of prestige, yeah, and so
okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So the role of non-executive directors from the perspective of managers and independent directors, a question, yeah. So you should provide some outside perspective for the companies, how the company is viewed from the position of outsiders. Also, you should provide some additional external experience and knowledge. You are expected, so it is expected on you that you bring some useful contacts to the company, because you have usually some expertise in other businesses. Yeah. Also, the nomination of directors and executive, so they are to nominate them and removing them. They participate in remuneration of managers and directors. They can participate, and it is expected on them that they would participate in internal audit. Certainly, they do not elaborate the strategy, but the managers, they defend the strategy. Well, if directors, they see some challenges, so they should somehow focus the managers on these challenges and on the ways how to overcome these challenges. As for the performance, so they should evaluate the performance of the company in relation to the agreed goals. Also monitor the reporting of performance, yeah. And as for the risk management, so they should check that financial information is accurate and the systems of risk management managers are robust. The directors and the independence of directors also should be viewed from the minority problem, yeah. So that means that they are independent from the majority shareholders, from the dominated owners. In this case, independent directors should somehow limit their controlling owners' representation. And also one of the reasons so to increase the number of independent directors is somehow to decrease the interlocking, the direct cross ownership, or the complex networks like in the Japanese system. They also can create a strong manager-owner problem, and one of their manager-owner rights is to somehow mitigate this problem. Yeah, and they also, the presence of independent directors is also to recommend to limit the control rights of owners. Yeah, and certainly the independence of directors from the minority perspective is the recommendation for some of the directors. Yeah. So directors mostly should represent the owners, and it is even for directors that they themselves own some shares. So this is the question. So whether directors should be independent, totally independent, or they act as owners. From the minority point of view, it's sometimes good if independent directors have some shares, yeah, because they, in this case, act as minority shareholders, yeah. From other stakeholders, the independence from other stakeholders is also important. So in this case, it depends on the country. So in some countries, we have mandatory stakeholder representation, and according to the law, for example, employees should have representatives in the board. And these countries like Czech Republic, Denmark, Germany, Norway, and Sweden, and sometimes it's also France. Also in bank boards in Denmark, for example, there should be the representatives of the state. And there are some other framework regulations in different countries. So directors are independent from the managers of the company. They are independent somehow from the majorities, but they are not independent from their stakeholders. And it is important that the transparency of stakeholder interests should be represented, should be clearly seen through the members of the board. And it is also important, in this case, we have the conflict of interests, or we may have the conflicts of interests. So it is also important to identify these conflicts of interests and somehow to prevent them or to avoid them. And also it is important to focus on minority problem when majority owner has stakeholder interests. For example, the bank is at the same time the representative of the majority shareholder, and in this case certainly the majority of the board will represent his interests, of the interests of this bank. So somebody should concentrate on minorities in this case. Yeah. So summing up, many countries and many perspectives of looking on independent directors. So some practices, some rules are to be elaborated. So independent directors should be not the managers or employees of the company. They should not be affiliated to persons that are affiliated with the company. They can be the party to a contract with the company, but in this case, the income of this director should not be more than 10% of the total personal income. And it also relates to the remuneration of directors. If the director represents a major business partner of a company, so in this case, transactions from these partners should not be more than 10% of the book value of the company assets. The independent directors can be representatives of the state without any other limitations here. And so also it is not very good if you are independent director, but you sit in the board for a long period of time, because in this case, you probably will lose your independence. So it is non-recommended to be an independent director, to be the supervisory board member more than 7 years. But this is like a common practice in many countries and many companies. We can find the longer tenure of independent directors. In some cases, it can be less. Yes, and certainly the company should disclose the information about independent directors and about the state of their independence in the annual report. For example, you were the minority shareholder of the company, you acted as an independent director, so you were a member of the board, but this year you somehow acquired additional stake in the company, and that's why your personal income increased. So this information should be reflected and disclosed in the annual report of the company. So the level of disclosure depends on the model of corporate governance, depends on the regulation. So as you remember, the most strict regulation is in the United States. But anyway, the company should disclose all the information about its independent director. So you always can find this information in the annual reports. So if we look at the Russian supervisory board, the average, it's not like all companies, they have the same composition. So the majority of Russian boards, they have the prevalence of outsiders over insiders, but insiders usually, so they represent companies, management and employees together. And they in average constitute about 35% of the board. The major shareholders usually have about 30% in the board. So minority shareholders also are presented, and their average share in the board, so proportion in the board, is about 9%. As the state also depends, because the state can be the representative of the major shareholder, but even if the state is not the representative of the major shareholder, so the company is not state-owned, the representative of state can be in the board, and usually the companies themselves, they invite or attract somehow their former representatives of the state, or sometimes the acting representative of the state, just to be protected from some state questions to the company. Yeah. And as for independent directors, so usually they have about 18% of their members in the average board. So it's the average composition. So in some companies it can be more, in some companies it can be less. And so if we look at the Russian criteria that are used in electing the supervisory board members, so we can see, so these are Russian criteria, but they are quite close to the others. So here we see the work experience within the company. Also the personal maturity, so whether the person is mature, whether he or she has their strategic visions, also the work experience in the industry, useful contacts, which is also important, loyalty, and some other reasons. So if we look at the diagram, we see that the companies mostly value the work experience, the personal maturity, the work experience in the industry, yeah, according to the frequency of choosing these features of the members of the board. Certainly, the question, which is also very important, is which resources the board possesses, yeah. Sorry. So, and as I have said, the directors should bring some additional resources to the company. So if they not represent their majority and they are somehow the minorities, the independent directors, so the main resource that they bring to the company is their personal skills. So the skills somehow can balance their representation, and sometimes the minorities, the independent directors with very good personal skills may be more useful for the company than the representatives of the management of the company. Also, the skills can also be extended to the personal networks, yeah. To some personal connections that are very important for the company, especially when the company is growing and it needs in some additional connections for expanding. Yeah. Also diversity. So diversity, we have discussed this. It can be perceived in different dimensions. Yeah. Certainly it's age, gender, ethnicity, social group, and personality of the director. Yes, so for example, I always give this example. So Danone, which is a global company that works in dairy milk products and some other industries, some other sectors of FMCG. So Danone has, now he is not the member of the board, but he was a member of the board for the long period of time. So Danone has invited Zinedine Zidane as a member of the board, as an independent director. And this was quite a good choice. Actually, it seemed a little bit strange, but it was quite a good choice because, well, he was male, he was French, French citizen, but with other ethnicity. So he was actually the representative of ethnic minority in France. So French company, he was very much associated with France as he played for many years successfully for French football team. He had some business experience in other sector of economy, certainly, but still in football. And he was quite good manager, yeah. As a coach, but also the manager of the team, at least. He was a media well-known person, yeah, because everybody, so he was there, the personage of many advertising campaigns, yeah, and this also somehow improved the recognition of Danone brand. And well, so the personality was strong. So from this point of view, this was a good choice. And actually he served in Danone for 7 years as an independent director. Yeah. Also, it is important to look at the education technical capabilities and professional skills. So like financial skills, engineering skills, marketing, legal skills, also an industry experience and networks. And certainly stakeholder or minority interests. So if their director somehow aligns with this interest, it's good. If the stakeholder is rigid, so do not answer this interest somehow, do not address this interest, it is not very good for the company. So what are the main? Diversity certainly brings advantages and disadvantages. So if we look at the advantages of diversity, so diverse directors, they bring different resources to the company. They also can bring some inspiration, some dynamics, which is important in dynamic environment. They also can bring some new strategies or new solution for the dynamic environment. So that's why sometimes the companies, they invite not the business persons, but for example, university professors, yeah. So university professors, they very well know how it should be in theory. They read a lot of literature, so they know usually all new trends in their management, for example, or in economics or in industries. So they actually can teach the management of the company to catch some new ideas, to become the leaders on the market, to teach them how to somehow capture the new opportunities that probably do not exist but can exist in the future, so can arise in the future. So it's very important. And sometimes these university professors are not just university professors in business or management, or if we discuss some company in engineering, there could be also people from engineering departments, but that could be philosophers, for example. If you remember Louis Vuitton case, so one of their members of the board, she is a professor of the university, and she is actually a very well-known philosopher, yeah? So about the future, who can somehow show us our way. Probably philosophers are the best representatives for doing this, yeah? So these are advantages. As for the disadvantages, yes, there are also some disadvantages. If your board is too diverse, you probably will spend a lot of time and a lot of resources to make them act as the single entity, so they should take decisions. There could be the contradictions between the members of the board, but they should somehow put down all their conflicts, yeah? And well, when they discuss the company's future, they should come to the agreement, and they should somehow inspire managers and make managers to act in the interests of the company, yeah? So if the board is too diverse, we can face with integration problems, yeah? And certainly the social interaction can somehow limit these problems, but probably the social interaction also cannot lead to some good decisions. And then the members of the board are either removed by shareholders or they just voluntarily step out. So we have the higher turnover of the board. Yeah. And also there should be some pressure to adjust to majority. So to come to some comfortable decisions. Yes. So if you have too much minorities, if you have too much diversity, so this pressure can be either higher, yeah, or it can be less because the majorities are weak. So it also affects the company's efficiency. Yeah. So which resources the directors bring to the company? So mostly it are the skills that are combined with responsibilities. So that's why the board of directors and the expertise is different from the expertise of consultants. Yeah. So for consultants, for example, they can have a lot of skills, they can have a lot of knowledge that but consultants usually they do not have the responsibility. So after they they defended their project and then they got their remuneration, so the contract is paid, they do not have any responsibility on the implementation of their advice, of their expertise. So the company can follow their advice, they can just put the consultancy project somewhere and store it and never start its implementation, or they can follow the advice of consultants but fail. But this is not the fault of consultants, so they actually do not bear any responsibility on the results. Yes, so for directors is different because they actually are responsible for the company's strategy, and their skills, they actually help them to bring more expertise, but also to implement the results, the expertise, the results of their advices. Yeah. So which type of expertise? Mostly it's financial expertise, expertise in auditing, so the monitor function. But it can also be the legal expertise or the strategy implementation. It can be marketing, it can be engineering, and so on. Yeah. Also, certainly, the directors, they bring their networking skills and networking opportunities, and they can act as the contact points to important stakeholders. For example, they are somehow represented by they somehow represent the stakeholders or are nominated to these stakeholders. So certainly they should communicate with the stakeholders and have a full understanding of what these stakeholders want on the company. Yes, so what are their requirements, what conflicts can potentially arise. So these stakeholders can be customers, suppliers, banks, and so on. If we have the bank representative, so it's mostly the control function, but they can be some other resources that directors can bring to the company. Yeah. As for the configuration of the board, so two more considerations. So we have discussed independent directors. So their common vision is that more is better than less, but the whole size of the board is also the question. Yeah, so the less is the size, yeah, the more is the commitment of directors. Yes, so they actually are very much committed. They share the whole responsibilities of the board. They are involved quite deeply in the company's affairs. Yeah, because otherwise it doesn't work in this case. Yeah. So the most recommendations say that the lower size is more committed. And the number depends on the company's size. So in Russia, it is also, as I have said, defined by the law, by the number of shareholders. So if you have more than 50 shareholders, you should have the two-tier board. If you have less shareholders, you can have one entire board. Also, the number is defined by the need of resources, by the need in diversity, by the need to represent the interests of different stakeholders, and certainly by functionality. If we have too many members, so we have the usually the problems in coordination. So if the board is too large, it can increase the coordination problem, and it can also create the free rider problem when some members of the board will just enjoy their benefits to be the member of the board, the remuneration, the status, the good mentioning of being the member in the board in personal CV, but they do not contribute a lot to the company's performance because the others do this very much effectively, and they just probably they do not think, but they feel themselves that their contribution is not needed, so they do not contribute. Yeah, anyway. So this is always a trade-off. So if we have the small size, probably it is less diverse. So we will have the lack of external resources, the lack of power somehow. And certainly with a small size, the directors will be overburdened with their responsibilities. So it leads to some personal problems sometimes, to the firing off. And some other problems. So too small size is not very good. As for the large size, the larger size, we see that there could be the problems with coordination and with free riders, if we have any. So it's always a trade-off, yes, between the lack of external resources and the problems of governance, the problem of coordination. So the typical number of board members in the United States is between 9 and 11. In other countries, it depends. So in Japan, it can be up to 50. Yeah. And the board, as I have said, so directors, they have different functional responsibilities. So usually they participate in different committees. So the 3 mandatory committees are Audit Committee, where independence is very important, certainly, and usually independent directors are the members of Audit Committee, so it is totally consisting on independent directors, or at least it is chaired by an independent director. Then the Remuneration Committee, so they discuss and approve the remuneration for managers bonuses, yeah. And the Nomination Committee. So the Nomination Committee makes the recommendation for the board members and for the managers of the company. So these 3 committees are mandatory for all the companies. And certainly there should be some more. So board committees normally function independently from each others. They are provided with sufficient resources and authority, and their work and the results of their work are evaluated by the board of directors. So board committees are a subset of the board, and they perform specific functions that assist the board in discharging its advisory and oversight responsibilities. Yeah. So alongside with these 3 committees, so Audit Committee, Compensation Committee or Remuneration Committee, and Nominating Committee, in public companies, there could be more committees. So there can be the Governance Committee that is devoted totally to the problems of corporate governance. There also can be the Disclosure Committee that is making its job by setting some disclosure requirements and then working to check the compliance of the company with these disclosure requirements. And there can be other standing or special committees. So if we look here, so the Audit Committee is composed of at least 3 independent directors. Could be some executives also. It should be formed to implement and support the oversight function of the board. specifically in the areas that are related to internal controls, to risk management, to financial reporting and audit committees, if the company has several external, for example. Sometimes we have the special committee which is devoted to risk management. Yeah. The remuneration committee or the compensation committee, again, it should be composed of at least 3 independent directors. It serves to design, review, and implement the compensation plans, the bonuses for the board members and for the executive officers. And the nominated committee is also composed of at least 3 independent directors, and it should be formed to monitor issues pertaining to the recommendations, nominations, and elections of the directors. So if we have 2 small board, all the members of the board, at least independent directors, will be overburdened. So they would sit in different committees, and these committees can eat all their time and all their resources. So that's why if the company has more than these 3 committees, or its board is too small, so the company's governance is under the question, yes, under the threat. So as for the governance committee, it can consist of executives and non-executive directors, and it usually is established to advise, review, and approve management strategic plans, decisions, and actions in management the company. As for disclosure committee, this committee is usually led by corporate counsel, chief executive officers, or controllers, and it is responsible for reviewing and monitoring the company's disclosure forms, so which are called 10K, 10Q, and other fillings that are required by American Security Exchange Committee. But in other countries, we also have this regulation, so we have different other forms. Also about earning releases, materiality issues, conference call scripts, and presentations to the investors by senior managers, which is important. We have discussed it, that bad news should be packaged in their best possible form, yeah, and the company should somehow choose how to release news to the market. Certainly, they should not cheat the market, they should not cheat their investors, they should not let any fraudulent behavior, but if the company behaves itself somehow honestly, but should somehow form their relations with investors, their investor relationships. So in this case, disclosure committee can advise them how to do this. And they, as I had said, could be some special committees. So the board of directors may form a special committee to assist in carrying out its strategic and oversight function, including financial committee, budgeting committee, investment committee, M&A committee, risk management committee, and so on. So certainly, different companies usually have different boards. So the standard model, so we have the listed quite large company with diversified ownership. So, and in our corporate governance issues, we mostly rely on such types of companies. So, but there could be some special requirements. For example, the company is not just a single company, but representing the group of companies, the company group, and it should include the representatives of the companies who are the members of this group. For example, if we look at Russia, so Gazprom is actually the group of companies, yes, so it's group. And that's why the board consists of representatives of the largest, not all the members, not all the members of these groups, but the largest companies that form Gazprom Group. Severstal is also the group of companies, and in the board of Severstal we have the representatives of different companies that make this large group. You all looked at the case of Louis Vuitton, Moët Hennessy Group, and you remember that this group actually consists of different businesses, which is which are somehow managed separately. So Christian Dior is the largest company within this group. And in the board, we see the representatives of all these companies who are included in Louis Vuitton, and so on. If the company is smaller and it has the status of family firm, or it still has the family members, and they do not want to replace the family members as managers by the external managers hired in the market. So it happens certainly when the companies start growing, but many companies still conserve and preserve maintain the family members in the board. So again, if you look at our examples, our cases of the company. So you remember that the representatives of Arnault family are still the members of the board and actually the chief executives of Louis Vuitton. If we look at Bombardier, we still see that the Bombardier family represents in the board. If we look at ArcelorMittal, we again will see their representatives of Mittal Group, both in the supervisory board and the management board of the company. Yeah, so the family representatives. And even if we look at some other companies, for example, Volkswagen, yeah, so there was a case several years ago, the failed attempt of acquisition of Volkswagen by Porsche, which was interesting enough itself. So it deserves a special lecture, yeah, because it was very interesting. But before this, Volkswagen, which was actually founded by Porsche family, so they still had the representative of the Porsche family within the members of the board, despite Porsche does not have a majority in Volkswagen shares, yeah. And certainly, in some companies, there could be requirements to employees representation, especially it is important when the company has high specific human capital investments, for example, in IT companies, yeah. So sometimes their human capital is very highly specified. And without these people or companies that are acting in R&D or in engineering, yeah. So in these cases, the people who are key scientists, for example, key researchers, are very much important. Sometimes their role is much more important than the role of any other managers of the company. And certainly in this case, these people as representatives of employees of research labs, for example, they should be presented in the board because they are responsible for the company's development, and the company cannot develop without capturing new technologies in this case and without investing in new technologies. So these people should explain to the board, and the board should explain to the shareholders and to the managers where to invest to develop the company's performance and to develop the company's competitive advantages. Yeah, and this is very important also. Okay, so here I would stop for today. And next time we will continue. I bring my so today I had some problems with connection, so sorry, and please take my excuses, yeah. And I will see you, I think, next week, yeah, all of you and my group also. Thank you very much for your participation, and have a good day, the remaining of the day, and goodbye. See you next Monday. I stop the recording.
Thank you.
Thank you.